Brooklyn, April. When the cherry blossoms have just begun to bloom and hearts still linger somewhere between the chill of winter and spring's gentle promise. Julia Monroe stepped into a small cafe tucked behind a cobblestone street in Williamsburg. She had just finished a tense meeting with a client and needed a dose of caffeine and quiet to keep from losing her mind. Inside the cafe, warm golden light filtered through sheer curtains, and the scent of waffles blended with espresso, wrapping around her like a soft blanket. She ordered a sugar-free latte and chose a seat by the window, where sunlight poured through the glass, casting shadows across the open pages of her book. But just a few minutes later, a soft camera click echoed from the table next to hers. Julia glanced over. A man, maybe in his 30s with slightly messy brown hair, was focused intently on his camera. He wore a worn leather jacket and sat at an angle, as if trying to capture the way the light hit the table. "Sorry," he said, looking up when he caught her gaze. "I wasn't trying to take your photo. It's just, the light here is beautiful." Julia smiled, not annoyed, just a little surprised. "Are you a photographer?" "Freelance," he nodded, squinting slightly in a pleasant way. "Evan Carter." "Julia Monroe." She extended her hand, and he shook it lightly. His hand was slightly rough, evidence of someone who'd held a camera for years. Strangely enough, the conversation flowed easily from there. They talked about coffee, about New York, about the honking and chaos that somehow made the city both maddening and unforgettable. Julia spoke about her high-pressure marketing job, about presentations that made her want to run. Evan shared a story about shooting photos in Morocco, getting lost in the desert, and sleeping beside a herd of camels. "What about love?" Julia asked, half joking. "Do you believe in things like fate?" Evan paused, then took a sip of coffee. "I believe in moments. Some people come at the right time, then leave. Like a beautiful frame. You don't always get to keep it." His answer made Julia pause. She wasn't sure why, but her heart sank a little. There was something in his eyes, a depth, a quiet sorrow without a name. When they parted, Evan handed her a business card. Just a black and white photo with the words Evan Carter Photography. No phone number. Just a QR code leading to an online portfolio. "Hope we meet again," he said. "Do you say that to everyone you secretly photograph?" Julia teased. Evan laughed, and in that moment Julia thought, maybe he wasn't like the others. Maybe this time, fate wasn't just something from a storybook. Some relationships begin like a spark, brilliant, unexpected, and strong enough to make everything before feel like a faded memory. 3 days after their meeting at the cafe, Julia received an email from Evan. The subject line read simply, "The best light is when no one's paying attention." Attached was a black and white photo of her sitting by the window that day, sunlight brushing her cheek and hair like a soft veil. Julia sat frozen in her office, staring at the image. It was a moment she never realized she looked so beautiful in. A beauty that wasn't forced or edited, just real. "So you did take a photo of me," she replied, attaching her phone number. Less than an hour later, Evan called. They met again that weekend. A gentle April afternoon, the sky a clear shade of blue like diluted ink. They strolled through Prospect Park, shared sandwiches from an old food cart, and talked about little things as if they'd known each other forever. Evan spoke of his childhood in Vermont, about his mother, who taught him to look at the sky each night and believe that tomorrow would be better. Julia told him about her childhood dream of becoming a writer, but how reality and fear of poverty had steered her into the world of advertising. "Are you afraid of love?" Julia asked as they sat on a wooden bench, watching little boats glide across the lake. Evan was quiet for a moment. "I'm afraid of hurting someone, because I know I don't always stay." Julia didn't respond, but something inside her broke gently. Not from fear, but because she thought maybe this time she was strong enough to make someone like him want to stay. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. They explored unfamiliar corners of a city that had long felt familiar. Julia took Evan to spontaneous art exhibits, where they debated for hours over a painting with nothing but the color red in 3 horizontal lines. Evan brought her along on early morning photo shoots at 5 a.m., where Julia stood shivering in the dawn mist, eyes sparkling with a quiet joy. She began staying over at Evan's small Bushwick apartment, a space cluttered with cameras, old books, and photos haphazardly pinned to the walls. 2 weeks in, she brought her toothbrush. then a nightgown, then her favorite box of tea. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both knew something was forming, quietly and more serious than either expected. One night, as soft rain fell over the sleeping city, Evan picked up his camera and took a photo of Julia sleeping. He watched her for a long moment before whispering, almost like a confession, "You make me want to stay." Julia didn't open her eyes, but she heard it. And for the first time in years, her heart exhaled. Their love wasn't flashy, wasn't loud. It was sharing coffee in silence each morning. It was laughter echoing through the apartment as they did laundry together. It was Julia learning to understand framing and lighting, and Evan beginning to keep track of meals and sleep, things he never used to care about. Julia's friends started asking, "Who is he?" She would just smile and reply, "Something I never expected." But in a small, quiet corner of Julia's mind, a vague unease lingered. Evan never spoke about the future. No plans. No promises. He lived in moments, in frames, as if today was all that mattered. And sometimes, when his gaze drifted far away, Julia couldn't tell if she was inside his dream, or just a part of a journey he would one day leave behind. It wasn't the shouting. It wasn't betrayal. Sometimes love dies simply because of prolonged silence and the words left unspoken. 3 weeks after the morning Julia left Evan a handwritten note, things between them were fine. So fine it felt suspicious. No more sleepless nights talking about silly things. No more playful mornings fighting over who'd make the coffee. Everything had settled into a quiet rhythm. A stillness with no name. Julia tried not to dwell on it. She told herself that everyone had to return to real life eventually, that love couldn't always be the overture of a symphony. But a part of her, the tender part, the one with keen instincts, sensed that Evan was slowly retreating. Bit by bit. Evan still cared. He still placed his hand on her back when they crossed the street. Still listened as she vented about endless meetings at work. But Julia could feel something had shifted in the way he looked at her. His gaze no longer held the same longing. One rainy afternoon, as they stopped by a used bookstore in Williamsburg, Julia caught Evan glancing at a stranger, a girl with loosely curled brown hair and wide eyes, laughing with her friend. Just a few seconds. Then he turned back to Julia, continuing to browse books as if he'd never looked away. But for Julia, those few seconds sliced through the fragile thread of trust. That night, she curled under the blanket while Evan typed away at his desk, editing photos for a new project. She turned to look at him and wondered, was he growing tired of her? She wanted to ask. But instead, she turned her face to the wall, swallowed the ache, and whispered to herself, "Don't push. Don't make him feel trapped." The next day, Julia invited Evan to dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date. She did her makeup carefully, wore the blue dress he once said looked like moonlight at night. But Evan arrived nearly an hour late. "Sorry. The shoot ran longer than expected," he said, without meeting her eyes. Julia nodded and smiled, but her hand was icy cold in his. During dinner, she tried to keep things light, told funny stories from work, brought up the idea of a fall trip to Charleston. But Evan only smiled faintly, nodded occasionally, and kept glancing at his phone. At last, Julia set down her utensils and looked directly at him. "Do you still want this, Evan?" He froze. A long silence stretched, like red wine slipping slowly down the side of a glass. "Julia," he set his phone down and exhaled. "I don't know." The words were soft, but they cut deeper than anything Julia had ever heard. She left the restaurant first, didn't wait for him to pay. Walking alone through the fine May drizzle of New York, Julia felt a storm of anger and heartbreak. But more than anything, she felt lost. What they once had was light, laughter, warm spring mornings in a tiny kitchen. Now it had been replaced by exhaustion and a distance neither of them could name. Julia didn't call Evan for the next 3 days. And he didn't reach out either. She started going to work earlier, staying later, burying herself in campaigns and meaningless meetings. On those quiet nights without him, she realized just how much she had grown used to his presence. A week later, Evan left her a message. "I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not good enough to love you the way you deserve. But I was never pretending." Julia read it over and over. Then she deleted it. Without replying. Not because she no longer loved him, but because she understood. When someone says they're not good enough, what they're really doing is carving themselves a guilt-free exit from your life. That night, Julia sat in her apartment and opened the photo Evan had once sent in his first email, the one of her by the window, light draped across her hair like a halo. She once saw herself as beautiful through his eyes. And now she would learn to see herself as beautiful again through her own. Some goodbyes don't need parting words. Some losses don't need tears. Julia woke up on the first Monday without any messages from Evan. No good morning, love. No reminders to eat breakfast. No photo of the sunrise captioned, "It reminded me of you." The apartment suddenly felt bigger, quieter, but also colder. She made herself a cup of black coffee, sat by the window, and watched the crowd rush down the street. Usually this was the time Evan would call, say a few random things just to hear her voice in the morning. Today her phone stayed silent. She didn't turn on the music like she usually did. Didn't put on makeup. Didn't rush. It was just her, an old sweater, and a silence she couldn't name. At the office everything was the same. Emails, meetings, unfinished briefs, coworkers laughing. Julia worked like a machine, nodding at the right times, smiling when expected, but inside she felt empty. Amid PowerPoint slides and looming deadlines, it felt like she was watching her life through a fogged-up window. "You okay?" Rachel asked, noticing Julia staring blankly at her screen for over 10 minutes. Julia nodded, forcing a weak smile. "I'm fine. Just a little tired." The first lie. And far from the last. 3 weeks passed. Julia didn't contact Evan. She didn't check his Instagram. Didn't reread their old messages. But the memories still crept in uninvited. When sunlight streamed through her window in the late afternoon, she remembered how he'd taken her first photo. When she heard jazz playing in a coffee shop, she pictured him swaying to the rhythm, eyes closed. Missing Evan wasn't sharp or painful. It was dull. Like a small burn that didn't bleed, but left her heart quietly numb. One Friday night after work, Rachel pulled Julia out of the house. "Time's up for moping. Tonight we live again." They went to a cozy bar in East Village. Soft lights. Smooth music. Warm air. Julia sat in a corner with a cocktail in hand, listening to Rachel complain about her husband's quirks, laughing when the bartender offered to buy Julia a drink. "Do you have a boyfriend?" the bartender asked politely. Julia paused for a second, then smiled. Not anymore. It was the first time she admitted it without choking on the words. She got home around midnight and sat on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, phone in hand. No messages. No missed calls. And for the first time she realized, maybe she didn't need them anymore. The next day Julia got a haircut. A small change, but one she never dared while with Evan. He used to say he loved her long hair. Messy and soft in the mornings. Now it was a few inches shorter. Clean. Light. She also started painting again. Messy watercolor sketches. Sunrises, windowsills, familiar streets she walked alone. Art, something she once abandoned for love, had now become her shelter. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Julia received an email from Evan. Subject: "If you're still listening. Asterisk. I don't know if I have the right to say anything anymore. But I miss you. Not because I'm lonely, but because I realized the most beautiful things in life are often only understood after they're lost. If you're still listening, just know, to me, you were the softest light I've ever seen." Asterisk. Julia didn't cry. She just read it and sighed. She didn't reply. Not because she no longer loved Evan, but because she was finally learning to love herself. That night, she wrote in her old journal, "I used to think love was everything, that if I just loved hard enough they would stay. But now I understand. People will leave, even if you love them with your whole heart. And that's not my fault. Nor is it theirs. It just means we were only meant to walk a part of the journey together, then part ways. We never know how strong we are until everything falls apart. And when it all shatters, we realize that we can rebuild it all." Work had returned to its usual rhythm, but Julia's life was no longer the same. It had been a long time since she felt she could breathe this easily. Her office was no longer a dull place filled with long, tense meetings. Now it was where she rediscovered her passion for work. She found joy in boundless creativity, marketing strategies, and bold advertisements. Through this, Julia began to realize that she truly loved her job. It wasn't something to fill a void. It was a source of pride, something she could do independently without needing anyone by her side. Rachel remained a wonderful companion, always encouraging her to join in social activities. A week after Julia cut her hair, Rachel dragged her to a small concert at a jazz cafe. You need to get out, Julia. Feel the music, feel the world, Rachel said. That night, Julia sat in a corner of the cafe, listening to the sounds of the saxophone, the soft light illuminating a small table amidst the guests lost in the music. For the first time, she felt as though she was alive again, not because of a man, but because of herself. It feels like a new world, doesn't it? Rachel asked, noticing Julia's relaxed expression. Julia smiled. Maybe? It feels like freedom, and nothing to worry about. A few days later, Julia decided to enroll in an art class downtown. She hadn't painted since she was a child, but for her, picking up a paintbrush again felt like reconnecting with herself. With messy strokes in free colors, Julia felt as though she was releasing the thoughts and emotions she had kept inside for so long. She no longer tried to become someone she wasn't. She no longer sought validation from others. Julia had learned to love the quiet moments in her life. And the miracle was, in those moments, she started to truly feel happiness. A month later, on a Friday evening, Julia met Chris again. Chris was an old friend she hadn't seen in a while. He was a freelance photographer she first met at an art exhibition a few years ago. He wasn't the type of guy Julia thought she would date, but this meeting felt different. He didn't have any mystical stories about far-off travels or adventurous escapades, but he had something Julia found in him: tranquility. Chris invited her to see his photography exhibition, which focused on city life and its darker corners. She was surprised to see how his photos reflected a realism and simplicity she had never noticed in the city before. Would you like to grab a coffee? Chris asked when the exhibition ended. Julia hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Sure. They sat in a small cafe nearby, talking about art, life, and simple things. There was no pressure, no expectations from Chris. He was simply a man who listened and shared little stories. You've really changed, Chris said, gazing into Julia's eyes. Not in the way people usually change, but you become stronger, more confident. Julia smiled. Maybe? I've learned to love myself, even though sometimes it feels lonely. But maybe that's the only way to truly live. 2 weeks later, they started dating again. Not rushed, not with expectations. Just two people meeting, sharing stories with no beginning or end. Julia realized that while she couldn't forget the emotions and memories with Evan, she was no longer bound by that past. Her relationship with Chris wasn't like the one with Evan. It wasn't a passionate whirlwind, but it was filled with respect and understanding. With Chris, Julia wasn't just someone he loved, she was someone he wanted to share his life with. And to her, that was everything she needed. Another month passed, and every morning when Julia woke up, she realized she no longer felt empty. She didn't need to wait for a call or a message from anyone to know that she was valued. She had learned to live without needing anyone else to confirm that for her. One autumn evening, as Julia sat on the balcony with Chris, watching the leaves fall around them, she thought about everything she had been through. Some relationships aren't meant to last forever, but they will always teach us something important about ourselves. Goodbyes aren't endings. They are opportunities to start anew. And this time, she was ready. Love is not about finding someone to live with. It's about finding someone you can't live without. But loving yourself can also bring that feeling, the feeling you never thought you'd find when no one else is around. March is here. The weather has warmed and the long, sunny days are starting to replace the gloomy, rainy afternoons. Julia sat by the office window, holding a cup of coffee, her eyes gazing outside at the blooming trees. She silently thanked spring, not only for making the city more vibrant, but also for helping her find peace within her soul. She felt changed. Not in a big way, but in small, gradual changes. Changes that she could only recognize when sitting alone and reflecting on the quiet moments in life. Work was still going well. Julia had now become an important part of the company's creative team, and the projects she took on were highly praised by her superiors. However, it wasn't just work, her personal life was also slowly transforming. Her relationship with Chris had taken another step. It wasn't fiery love, but a peaceful and steady connection. They met on weekends, sometimes just simple evenings, taking walks in the park, having dinner at a small restaurant, or sitting together on the sofa watching old movies. Chris didn't pressure her to feel anything, nor did he ever make her feel burdened with thoughts of the future. He respected her and what she was going through, and that made Julia feel loved, not for what she had, but for who she truly was. One day, while she was working, she received a call from Rachel. She heard her best friend's voice on the other end of the line. Julia, why have you been so quiet? Yesterday I met someone, and I think you'll like him. Julia laughed. I'm busy with a big project, Rachel. I don't have time. I know, but listen, he's a photographer and really interesting. You'll like him. I'm at the cafe on the corner of the street. Do you want to come? Julia thought for a moment before agreeing. She wasn't sure about meeting someone new, but sometimes stepping out of her comfort zone could bring unexpected things. When Julia arrived at the cafe, she saw Rachel sitting with a man who had an open face, bright eyes, and a warm smile. He stood up when he saw her, extended his hand for a handshake, and introduced himself. Hi, I'm Liam. Rachel has told me a lot about you. Julia felt something different right from their first meeting. Liam wasn't the type of person she imagined. He wasn't tall or boastful with grand stories. But something in his eyes, the way he listened when she spoke, made Julia feel at ease. He was like a new friend she never knew she needed. They talked all afternoon about hobbies, work, and everyday stories. Liam didn't push her to share too much, but simply listened and understood. Julia realized that in the way he spoke, there was a rare sincerity she had never experienced before. Actually, I didn't think we would meet like this, but life is always full of surprises, Liam said, a warm smile on his face. Julia smiled but didn't reply. She realized that although she didn't know what the future would hold, she was starting to feel like she was opening up again. That night, when she got home, Julia sat in her room thinking about her meeting with Liam. It was just an ordinary encounter, but it made her feel something new, as if she had rediscovered a part of herself that she had forgotten. Liam wasn't Evan. He wasn't like Evan, and that was what made her feel free. She wasn't rushing to think about whether he could become someone special. But that didn't matter anymore. She had learned that love wasn't something you sought in emptiness, but rather a part of the journey of self-discovery. And sometimes the people you meet along the way can help you realize that true love begins with loving yourself. A week later, Rachel called Julia again. Liam wants to meet you again. He says you're really interesting and wants to see you again. What do you think? Julia smiled, not because she had fallen for Liam, but because she knew that not everything had to be about rushing into love. Sometimes you just needed to open your heart to new opportunities and let things unfold naturally. Sure. I'd be happy to meet him again. That evening, as Julia sat on the balcony, looking at the city lights sparkling under the dark sky, she felt something new. Not the pain of a past relationship, not the complications of love and unfulfilled hopes. She felt the freedom in her own heart, and that was the most important thing. Julia was beginning a new journey, not just with Liam, but with herself. Her relationship with Chris, her meeting with Liam, and her discoveries in life gave her the chance to live true to her emotions without fearing the future. Love is not about finding someone to fill the emptiness in your heart. It's about finding someone with whom you can paint a beautiful picture, even if sometimes that picture may be torn apart and recreated. Julia had entered a new phase in her life. She was no longer the lost girl, constantly seeking love outside of herself. After months of quiet reflection, she realized that true love was the rebirth of herself. She didn't need to find a man to feel complete. She had been complete since the moment she began to rediscover herself. However, the change in Julia was not an easy journey. Occasionally, she still felt pulled by memories of Evan, mixed emotions of loss, and things she had once longed for. But each time, Julia reminded herself that everything was in the past. Evan was a part of her history, and she couldn't keep living in those memories. She needed to live for herself. With each morning she felt stronger. Work remained a place where she found joy and freedom. She was gradually establishing her position in the company, not just as an ordinary employee, but as someone with creativity and the ability to lead new strategies. Julia felt that her career was on the right path, and that was something she had always wanted. One weekend evening, as Julia and Rachel were sitting together in a familiar cafe, Rachel looked at her with a curious expression. "How do you feel about Liam?" Rachel asked, her tone not too probing but filled with care. Julia paused for a moment, thinking before replying. "He's a good person, very understanding, and there's no pressure. But I'm not sure if it's love. Maybe I'm just not ready yet." Rachel nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "Don't rush it. Love doesn't always come the way we expect. Sometimes we just need to give it time." Julia didn't know why she felt the need to control everything. She feared being hurt again. But there was a special connection with Liam. He wasn't like Evan, and that made her feel safe. But could a relationship develop if both were not truly opening up? A few days later, she decided to call Liam. After a brief conversation, they agreed to meet up over the weekend. Julia felt relieved to realize that she didn't have to force herself to love him, but she wanted to take the time to learn more about him. When they met, Liam took Julia to a small park where he had taken a series of nature photographs. His photos weren't just beautiful scenes. They captured vivid moments, emotional images, as if he could sense the soul of everything around him. "Do you like them?" Liam asked, his eyes sparkling with joy as he watched Julia lose herself in his photographs. Julia smiled. "You see beauty in things I've never noticed. It's like a new perspective I've never had." Liam nodded. "Love is sometimes like that. It doesn't always come from what we know. It can come from things we never thought of." Julia looked at him, her heart suddenly fluttering. His simple words contained deep truths. It was a feeling she had never had with Evan. That day's meeting wasn't filled with promises or commitments. Instead, Julia felt lightness and freedom in each moment. They simply shared their lives, the things they both valued. That evening, when Julia returned home, she couldn't stop thinking about what Liam had said. She couldn't deny that part of her wanted to open up to him. But perhaps this time, she would take it slow and not rush into feelings she didn't fully understand. In the following days, Julia began to reflect more on herself. She realized that in the past she hadn't given herself enough space to grow. She had been too focused on pleasing others, forgetting the importance of caring for herself. She decided to start over with the simple things, like joining creative classes, reading new books, and taking time to care for her health. She had learned that love didn't always have to be a connection with someone else. Sometimes, it was the love you give to yourself. One Friday evening, Julia stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking outside and feeling the gentle breeze. She felt at peace inside, no longer burdened by worries about the past or fears about the future. She had begun to realize that love wasn't something you had to search for. It was something that naturally comes when you are ready to welcome it. She smiled to herself. "I'm ready." In this chapter, Julia began to realize that love wasn't about rushing into a connection with someone else. It was a process of understanding herself and loving herself. Her relationship with Liam gradually became clearer, and Julia began to experience the freedom and love she had never felt before. There are always moments when you have to face the truth. Whether it's the truth about someone else or about yourself, accepting the truth is the first step towards healing. The snow had begun to fall on the late afternoons, covering the city with a thin layer. Julia stood by the office window holding a warm cup of coffee, gazing outside as the snowflakes gently drifted through the air. Time passed by, and she realized that she no longer felt anxious or uneasy about everything around her. Julia's life now seemed to be more stable, from work to her relationships. But something inside her still didn't feel completely at peace. After her meetings with Liam, Julia started to notice changes within herself. Deep emotions that she hadn't known how to face before were slowly returning. She couldn't deny that she was starting to like Liam, but that feeling came with self-doubt. Was she just looking for a new figure to replace Evan? Or was she truly ready for a new relationship? Over the past few weeks, she noticed that she tended to compare everything to her past. Her feelings for Liam, the way he cared for and understood her, all reminded her of the memories with Evan. But was she still living in the shadow of the past and hadn't truly accepted that she had moved on? The meeting that day with Rachel made Julia think even more about all her emotions. Rachel could understand her better than anyone, and when Julia told her best friend that she didn't know if she could love Liam, Rachel just listened silently for a moment, then said, "Julia, you've lived in the past for too long. He's not Evan, and you're not the girl you used to be. Everything has changed and you need to change too." Those words felt like a slap in the face. Julia felt like a wall had collapsed inside her. But at the same time, it was also a sense of liberation. She had let the past pull her for too long. And now she was finally beginning to realize that she needed to learn how to forgive herself in order to love someone else genuinely. The next day, Julia decided to do something she hadn't dared to do in a long time. Face the truth. She arranged to meet Liam in the afternoon at a small cafe where they often met. This time, Julia knew she needed to be clear about how she felt. Not because she didn't want to continue seeing him, but because she needed to clarify whether she was truly ready for a serious relationship. Liam had arrived first, as always. He was the one who showed up early. When Julia walked in, he smiled and waved at her as if nothing had changed. They sat down and ordered drinks, the atmosphere still comfortable as always, but Julia felt a little tension in her heart. Liam immediately noticed. "Is something wrong, Julia?" You seem different. Julia looked at him, took a deep breath, and decided to say everything she was thinking. Liam, I need to be honest with you. I'm not sure I can continue with this relationship. I feel like there's something holding me back, and I don't know if I can truly open up to you. Liam was silent, but he didn't seem sad or angry. He looked into her eyes and then nodded. Julia, you don't have to rush. I'm not forcing you to feel anything. I just want to know that you'll be yourself, not someone else. You can take your time to understand yourself, and if we can walk this journey together, then that's a good thing. Julia felt a sense of relief upon hearing those words. Liam wasn't asking her to make a decision right away. He respected her decision, and that made her feel comforted. She didn't feel any pressure. When they parted ways after their meeting, Julia didn't know where this relationship would go. But what mattered more was that she realized she needed to face herself before she could open up to anyone else. She no longer feared love, but she didn't want to put herself in a situation where she wasn't truly ready. At home, Julia sat in her room, looking at herself in the mirror, asking herself a simple yet complicated question. Am I ready to love? The answer didn't come immediately, but she knew one thing for sure. She was slowly finding the answer within herself. It was a long journey, and perhaps she would have to go through more difficulties, but at least she knew she was heading in the right direction. A few days later, while Julia was working in the office, she received an unexpected call from Evan. She looked at the phone screen, her heart suddenly in turmoil. This was a call she hadn't been expecting, but one she couldn't avoid. She answered the phone and Evan's voice came through. Julia, I know you might not want to hear this, but I need to talk. It might not be right now, but I need you to know something. In this chapter, Julia faced the truth about herself and her emotions. Her meeting with Liam made her realize that, before she could love someone else, she needed to love herself and understand what she truly wanted. Evan's appearance at the end of the chapter marks a turning point in Julia's journey, and will bring new challenges for her. No matter how hard you try to run, the past always finds a way to catch up with you. But can we accept and learn from what's behind, or will we let it blur the path ahead? When the call from Evan ended, Julia felt like a small storm had just swept through her heart. She wasn't sure how to face him, as it had been a long time since she had thought about Evan in that way. But this call, though brief, brought up a truth she couldn't avoid. Her past was still there, waiting to be addressed. After hearing Evan's voice, Julia felt a bit confused. She knew she couldn't keep living in fear of what had happened, but his appearance stirred an indescribable feeling in her. She wondered if love was still within her, despite all the pain and hurt between them. Julia decided to call Evan back. She couldn't keep running from the unanswered questions. And if this meeting could help her find the answers to her inner doubts, then why not try? That weekend, they met at an old cafe, the place where they first met. Everything seemed the same. The cozy atmosphere, the soft yellow light, the gentle sounds of background music. But amidst it all, Julia felt a great void, as if everything was changing silently and beyond her control. When Evan walked in, Julia saw him for the first time in a long while. Time had changed him somewhat. He looked more mature, but his eyes remained the same. They still held the haunting of old memories. Julia, he said, his voice low and hesitant, thank you for meeting me. Julia nodded, a part of her wondering whether she should say what was weighing on her heart. But she knew that sometimes you can't push the past out of your life without facing it. I don't know what you want to say, Evan. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, Julia replied, her voice calm but tinged with tension. Evan sat down, looking into her eyes. I know you don't want to hear any more apologies. But I need you to know that I've realized I was wrong. You were right about a lot of things. I wasn't the person you needed and I hurt you. I don't want to get back together with you, Julia. But I want you to know that I regret what happened. Julia felt Evan's words strike her heart. She hadn't expected to hear these words from him. She had once longed for an apology, but now the truth of it only made her feel heavier. Evan, you don't need to apologize. I've come to understand that we couldn't continue. But you can't just come here to apologize and then leave. I need time to understand myself, to heal. I've been living in unclear emotions for too long. Evan sat in silence for a moment, his eyes growing sad. I know you've suffered. And I was the one who caused that. I don't expect you to come back to me, I need you to understand that I've changed. And I don't want you to continue living in that sorrow. Julia didn't know what she was feeling anymore. The emotions inside her rose again, but this time, they weren't anger or pain as before. She no longer felt hatred. The wounds of the past seemed to have faded, but at the same time, they brought her a newfound sense of freedom. She no longer had to live with suppressed emotions. "Evan," she said, her voice stronger now, "I can't keep living in the past. We're done, and that's something I need to accept. But I also need to tell you that I've forgiven you. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I'm ready to move on." Evan looked at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected Julia to be this strong. He nodded as if understanding something he had never seen before. "I hope you'll be happy, Julia. I truly hope you find the peace you deserve." The meeting ended in silence. Julia left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in a long time. She knew she no longer had to carry the burden of the past. She wasn't someone seeking revenge or trying to prove something. She was simply a person wanting to heal and continue on the path ahead. When Julia returned home, she felt a noticeable shift within her. The past could no longer dictate her future. And no matter where her relationship with Liam might go, at least she was now ready to love herself first, so she could truly love someone else. In this chapter, Julia confronted Evan, someone from her past whom she had once loved and been hurt by. The meeting helped her realize that forgiveness wasn't about reconciliation, but about freeing herself from old burdens. She found the strength to move on and was ready for a new chapter in her life. In the end, life is not about the mistakes of the past, but about how we rise, choose, and live in the future. Happiness is a decision, not something that is predetermined. Julia stood by the window of her apartment, gazing outside. The glittering lights of the city made her feel small. Yet at the same time, they reminded her that no matter how vast the world was, she still had the power to decide her life. Her own life. She had spent so much time looking back, regretting the wrong decisions and the things left undone. But now she understood that she didn't need to live in fear anymore. In the past few weeks, Julia had returned to herself. Her work was progressing well, and she had begun to love herself more. Each day she no longer looked into the mirror with disappointment, but instead with a sense of pride. She knew she had overcome the worst and had learned how to rise. But most importantly, she was no longer chasing a shadow from the past. Liam still appeared in her life, but unlike before, he no longer brought confusion or anxiety. He was the one who made her feel at ease and comfortable, but also the one who made her face the biggest question she had always been searching for. Could she open her heart to love again? One winter evening, when the whole city was covered in white snow, Julia decided to meet Liam. They had arranged to meet at the small cafe they both loved. She didn't know where this meeting would lead, but she knew she was ready. Ready to face whatever might come. Ready to love. Liam had arrived early, sitting at a familiar corner. When Julia walked in, his eyes lit up. He smiled as though nothing had changed. But Julia knew everything had changed. They had both gone through challenges and pain, but those very things had helped them grow. "You're here," Liam said, his voice gentle, full of warmth. Julia sat down across from him. This time there were no feelings of anxiety or uncertainty. She only felt peace. "Liam," Julia began, her voice soft but steady, "I've thought a lot about us, about what I feel, and I've come to understand that I can't keep living in the past. I have to choose a future for myself, with someone I want to share it with." Liam listened, his eyes never leaving hers. Julia felt her heart race, but not out of worry. It was a different feeling, a sense of freedom. "I'm not sure where we'll go, but I don't want to waste any more time. I want to love and be loved, and I believe I can do that with you," Julia said, no longer hesitating, but with a newfound confidence. Liam smiled brightly. "I feel the same, Julia. I don't want you to worry or hesitate. I just want us to walk together truly." Liam's words made Julia's heart feel lighter. Finally, she felt a sense of completeness, as though everything was happening at the right time. No more fear, no more doubts. She was ready to love and be loved. After that conversation, Julia's life didn't become easier or simpler. She and Liam faced their own challenges, but the important thing was, they faced them together. They learned to understand, listen, and appreciate each other more every day. Julia no longer allowed the past to control her emotions, and that was the first step toward living happily. For Julia, happiness wasn't a destination. It was a journey she would walk with Liam, not because they were perfect, but because they understood that love was never simple. Love was a choice, a commitment, and the ability to forgive. A year later, on a summer afternoon, Julia and Liam stood together on the beach. looking out at the vast ocean. Everything around them was peaceful, but in Julia's heart, she felt the peace she had been searching for all this time. They had been through many ups and downs, but together, they had built a strong relationship. Not without difficulties, but full of love and understanding. Julia held Liam's hand, smiling softly. "You know, I never thought I could love again." Liam smiled, pulling her into an embrace. "I know, but you were ready. And you chose happiness." Julia nodded, looking into Liam's eyes with no more doubt. "I chose you. And I know this is the right choice." The story ends with a conclusion about Julia's growth, how she learned to forgive, rediscovered herself, and stepped into a new love without being bound by the past. Her relationship with Liam was not a replacement for what she had gone through, but a new beginning, a choice for happiness in life.